Welcome. Thank you for showing up on a Wednesday. Before we started here, we had to remind ourselves that we are in fact on a Wednesday, not a Tuesday. You never know after Memorial Day. You got to locate what day of the week you're in. If you can, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you coming from? And yeah, state and name. And if we can, how many days left in the school year for you? We tend to have people from all kinds of places show up, and yeah, people have different end of the year dates, and some of us are probably counting down and know with precision how many days are left. Lori,
I know Dana says 13, I believe. I would think you would know.
I think Dana knows.
Well, we get looked here. I'm in Shoreline, Washington, just north of Seattle. So our kids aren't out until the 21st, I think 20th, 21st, whatever that Friday is of June. But I have a senior and he's pretty much done. It's really hard to get him to continue to finish out the year. They had senior
When was the
day
last day
yesterday.
in his mind, Lori? When do you
His
think
last
that?
day's the 14th or 15th, so he's getting closer.
But in his mind, when was it?
Oh, as soon as AP tests were done, which was 2 weeks ago.
He's like summertime. I see people in the chat that are already on break. There is a little bit of bragging there, and good for you. You deserve
Oh,
every
yeah.
bit of it, just like others are going to deserve every bit of it when that time comes. Yeah, I'm here in Minneapolis. My name's Clay Cook. I'm the Chief Development Officer at CharacterStrong. My girl's last day is tomorrow. Yeah, just why not end on a Thursday? Let's just do it. Let's just plot the day. Let's make it a Thursday. Let's wrap things up and just let that Friday kind of hang out. The kids are very excited. Well, I'm here with Dr. Lori Linus. She is our Director of Tier 2 and Tier 3, and we are doing a webinar today on our CharacterStrong Tier 3 solution. And we're going to give you a glimpse of what it looks like from beginning to end, give you a feel for it, would welcome any questions that you might have. We believe that us kind of showing what the CharacterStrong Tier 3 solution looks like is also an example of how we can work towards building a Tier 3 system of support in our schools. When we're talking about Tier 3, we all probably have certain students in mind who could really benefit from us being able to mobilize effective personalized supports. Not only would it benefit for those individual students, but it would benefit also classroom context and perhaps school-wide kind of culture and climate in a building. So I'm going to just jump into this. The first thing we have here is from our skill building support. We call it skill supports, and we have rapport building questions. So someone who's working with a young person who has maybe underlying mental health needs and can benefit from learning skills, there's quick and easy ways to be able to engage in conversation. And then we have like deeper rapport building questions that allow the educator and student to get to know one another. So if you can in the chat, what two things in one person would you bring here? This is quite an amazing place. And Lori, I'm going to ask you while we give some time for people to respond in the chat. What are two things in one person you would bring to this magical place?
Yes. Well, I'm very fair. And so I'm going to bring a large bottle of sunscreen and probably a big sun hat. And I would bring my son. My husband's actually been to Machu Picchu, has talked it up. So we would both like to go together.
I love that. Yeah, and the altitude, you're closer to the sun, so that makes sense to want to be able to protect your skin. Yeah, there's plenty of things that I would want to bring to this place. Yeah, something to capture the moment would be definitely on my mind. And then I would definitely want to take my wife as someone who I love to adventure with and explore what this world has to offer. So a little bit of reminders before we begin. This is going to be recorded. You can share with others. There's going to be some links and resources that we'll be sharing in the chat. So make sure you keep an eyeball on the chat. And yeah, engage with us. If you have a question, you have any comments or ways to share, to elaborate based on your own experience, use the chat feature, and then we will be sending the recording and follow-up resources on the back end of today. So before we get started, I just wanted to contextualize the work. This is kind of our recipe at CharacterStrong for how we go about business to create a more loving world through education. These are kind of firm beliefs that we have that kind of manifest in the type of work we engage in with school partners. One of them is we believe that we live in a multi-tiered world, that people have varying levels of need. So we have to be able to mobilize multi-tiered supports, including tier 3 supports for students who have greater needs for that level of care. But educators have to be equipped and feel equipped. So we have to make sure educators feel competent and confident to be able to deliver those multi-tiered supports so each and every student can access the level of care they need to be well, belong, and engage fully in learning experiences. We also believe that for educators to feel equipped, that occurs in the context of really effective school leadership. So we work with school leaders to build a healthy culture and climate for the adults and be able to put in place the supports that enable educators to be equipped to deliver those multi-tiered supports. What are the outcomes of that? Is we create really nurturing environments where young people can access the support they need to achieve whole child success. So part of this as an organization is making sure we provide educators with multi-tiered solutions. And that's one of the reasons why, as an organization, we've really intentionally ventured into the space of tier 3. But tier 3 isn't in a vacuum. We know tier 3 is built on foundational tier 1 supports that each and every student receives, tier 2 supports that are really about early intervention, that provide kind of intermediary supports for students with more mild to moderate levels of need. And then we know we can go eyes wide open into the work as educators, recognizing there's students that are going to need tier 3 supports. Why? For a variety of factors that we can discuss. Nevertheless, there's students who have greater needs for more intensive care. So one question I would love for people to respond to in the chat, and I'll give it a little bit of time, and is what are the implications here? When we're talking about tier 3, if we don't get tier 3 right in our schools, what are the implications of that? And I know, Lori, you've worked with school systems for over a decade. You've pulled your sleeves up. You get into the work with educators and have a history of supporting students with more intense needs. What are the implications if we don't get like a tier 3 system of support right?
Yes, yeah. And I love you said over a decade, 26 years now, working with kids with, and all of that time spent with kids with very high intensive needs and working with school supports. And certainly one of the first things that comes to mind for me is we have an increase in referrals for special education. When we cannot do that prevention work and that intervention work, then we just see kind of a pipeline to refer kids for special education. And also a reliance then on outside supports, needing to kind of bring in quote unquote the experts because we're not building our competence amongst our staff.
Yeah, I love that perspective, because when we believe that a CharacterStrong Tier 3 lives within the general education milieu of supports, and it is within the realm of prevention. And if we don't have effective prevention in place, then the only game to be played in town is special education. And so we often have really inflated special education identification rates. And sometimes we risk the stigma of that process of, pursuing kind of the within child disability. There's a lot of good suggestions here from Terry. Yeah, the educators feel stressed, and it does increase burnout because students are bringing needs to the educational table, and many times educators are feeling outmatched. Kim, I love the perspective on just kind of the gap widening, because the problem is defined as what's actually happening versus what we expect and want to happen. And so those problems, that gap between what's happening and where we want the student to be can get bigger. Like the behavior becomes more intense, or the academic needs become more discrepant from where they should be performing. We look at Tier 3 as kind of personalizing intensive support for students with the greatest levels of need. It is for a few students, a subset of students who have greater needs for support, and it's really about personalization. We're up in the ante in the type of support we provide. It's going to be more individualized and personalized to the student in the context in which they're functioning within. And so we got to have really effective supports that help guide that personalization process. So we're making sure we're putting in effective strategies that actually can move the needle on outcome. Now, here's a formula we operate in for across all tiers. We have a formula for each level. This is our Tier 3 formula. We think about the who, the what, and the how. The who is really a few students, and we got to have really clear decision rules to figure out for whom would benefit from Tier 3 supports. And we got to have really clear decision rules. How do we go from Tier 1 to Tier 3? If the student's needs are severe enough to warrant that, many of the students are going to really go from Tier 2 to Tier 3. We're going to go with an intermediary level of support, and non-response to that level of care is going to be data that warrants an intensification of support. So we got to have really good decision rules. We're talking anywhere from 1 to 5% of students that a school has the capacity to serve. The what are these intensive personalized supports? And we're going to get into this and talk about some evidence-based approaches regarding the types of personalized supports that educators can implement. And the how here is the kicker in our view. It's team-driven problem solving. And I know you spend a lot of time, Lori, thinking about like teaming as a catalyst for change. Why is that last part of this formula so essential to get Tier 3 right?
Yeah, and I think, it's team driven using data, and it's that Tier 3 shouldn't be a person. Sometimes people will build their kind of intensive supports around the counselor or a behavior specialist. And when that person leaves, all of the knowledge leaves. It really has to be a team that can come together and kind of collectively brainstorm, share the load, look at the data. It really is a secret sauce in schools to keeping this moving forward well.
Yeah, I like to often just think about if I was going to just go in and be able to quickly assess how well like Tier 3 supports are going, I'm going to first check and see if they have a team. If they don't have a team, then I know Tier 3 is the capacity and the effectiveness is going to be pretty weak. If they do have a team, I'm going to hang out and watch how that team functions and see if they follow a process. Do they have regular attendance? And if that team is not functioning well, that has implications for students. Students aren't probably receiving really quality supports that are being delivered with fidelity. There's probably not being data being collected as a result of that process. So when it comes time for that team to reconvene, but that team is like a microcosm of the health of a Tier 3 system of support. How well are they functioning? Because the question is, if Tier 3 is a process, who's doing the work? Well, it's a group of people are coming together to really coordinate their actions to wrap support around a student. So we've been in the work. We've consulted with virtually every state. We've been in every geographic region, from some of the biggest school systems to some of the smallest. And there are some common themes around struggles when it comes to Tier 3. We know some schools go with a one size fits all, yet students have varying reasons for their needs. And so we can't have a one size fits all. Often, Tier 3 becomes stigmatizing. We use it as a label, and it's a way we talk about students. That's a Tier 3 student, instead of through a strength-based, asset-focused lens, that Tier 3 is a system of care that gets activated based on need. It is not a diagnostic label for a human. We see a lot of the work, it's piecemealed, meaning there's a lot of dots that need to be connected. There's a process we got to follow, but it's piecemealed together and it's fragmented, and it makes it hard to actually follow through with each step and deliver the care as long as the approach is piecemealed and not integrated and all accessible in one easy to access place. A lot of times the tier 3 work becomes more reactive and crisis mode, when in fact, effective interventions require us to get on the proactive side of support delivery, not reacting to when the student's de-escalated or having a crisis. That is actually de-escalation and crisis, but not a bona fide tier 3 evidence-based support. A lot of the work we see at tier 3, it's outsourced, meaning we're not optimizing the current people on our payroll in our schools to take up the torch and build capacity to deliver tier 3. Instead, we're outsourcing. Yet the evidence suggests that the most effective supports are ones that are routinized into the daily fabric of students' educational experience. Because of this, often schools are spending a lot of time and energy supporting students with limited return on investment. And so we think a lot about how can we design solutions that address these existing struggles. I would encourage, if you can, in the chat, share which of these existing struggles kind of resonate with you based on the work you do in your system. It could be one in particular, it could be multiple of them. Which ones resonate with you? Lori, in the work you've done, you've done work across all tiers, but if we were going to kind of focus on the tier 3 level of care, which one of these most resonate with you that you see schools kind of struggle with?
Yeah, it's definitely the reactive crisis mode. Like when we don't have good prevention-based supports, we just find ourselves kind of on that hamster wheel of reacting all of the time and often living in that space of crisis.
Yeah, and people wonder how can we ever get on that front end more proactive service delivery. And so we want to talk about some of the needs. I'm going to rip through these pretty quickly so we can get into kind of from start to finish. What does the CharacterStrong Tier 3 solution look like? And how could schools mimic a similar approach? Because we have a product, we have a solution that we've pulled together along with professional learning, but that doesn't mean schools can't model what they do based on some of this. So we know students are bringing mental health needs to the educational table. We now know that 1 out of 3 struggle with mental health. Of a subset of those really have more intensive mental health needs. And those mental health needs exist across anxiety, trauma, depression, executive functioning. Now, when you're out there working with schools, what are you seeing, Lori, when it comes to kind of the mental health needs students are bringing to the table?
Definitely post-COVID a rise in anxiety and depression. And I think one of the things is we're seeing more schools where kids are turning to online learning because of the impacts and effects of this. They're starting to see school refusal, and that then cuts out all of the social emotional kind of learning and growth that kids get when they're in a school and interacting with each other.
Yeah, we know there's been an uptick in the prevalence of mental health needs. And the kicker here is mental health needs that are impairing some aspect of daily life functioning. It's getting in the way. It's causing them to miss out on really critical experiences for their short and long-term development and well-being. And so that's where we would say we don't have to diagnose a student with a disorder. What we would say is if it's impairing some aspect of daily life functioning, we need to mobilize a support. And that support should be tailored to their unique needs. We also know there's a lot of high intensity behaviors, really big behaviors. Those big behaviors are causing an impact on self, others, and the learning environment. And since COVID, we haven't seen that subside yet. We still have high rates of reported really big behaviors that students are exhibiting day in, day out, and leaving educators wondering kind of how do we address these bigger behaviors? What supports do we have available at our fingertips that are effective, that can stabilize those behaviors and promote the student success in school? There's also data that, 1 to 2 out of every 10 educators report some form of violence from students. And this is kind of connected to this, is that students' behavior is a form of communication. When students' needs are met, their behaviors can become big. And sometimes that behavior can become violent. Sometimes that behavior is more internalizing. It's about withdrawing, avoiding, escaping, and sulking away versus acting outward, which is externalized behaviors. Now, some of the needs we see on the level of educators is educators are in this place of external locus of control, which means we spend a lot of time thinking about factors that go beyond our control that explain why students have their needs. The research is pretty clear. The more we talk about factors that go beyond our control, the more fatigue we're likely to experience, because it's like calories in the brain getting chewed up. Like we're devoting a lot of cognitive energy, but without a solution, without a sense of feeling agency that we can do something about the identified need in front of us. And what that does is take a toll. It takes a toll, causes people to feel fatigued. Often people get frustrated at the source of it. They feel a lack of self-efficacy, lack of confidence, and ultimately feel defeated and outmatched based on the needs students are bringing. Now, what we're trying to do is flip the script. We need solutions that help educators go from external locus of control to internal locus of control. And when we can flip this script, the evidence is really clear that when educators recognize that they have control over certain practices and supports that can make a difference to meet the needs of students who require Tier 3 support, they feel more empowered. They have a greater sense of vitality and energy. They feel a greater sense of efficacy and confidence. And ultimately, they're hopeful and optimistic. And so they lean more into a problem-solving process, more engagement as a member of a team that's wrapping support around a student. Now, Lori, this probably resonates when you go into and you see a group of educators that's really solution-oriented. They're operating from that place of internal locus of control. What do educators need to get to this place where they feel empowered, have energy, feel confident that they can meet students' needs, and are hopeful about the work they're doing?
Yeah, I think they need a couple of things. I mean, one is going back to that teaming model. They have to have a team that they can really pull together that can help them to problem solve. They've got to have good professional development and ongoing coaching to be able to do these pieces as well. And then they've got to have the tools, right? So we really need tools that are easy for teachers to access where they're not having to go on and spend hours on sites, maybe pulling stuff that's not evidence-based together to try to meet the needs of our students.
Yeah, well, this is what we think about at CharacterStrong. What can we do to mobilize a solution that can help boost a sense of internal locus of control among educators, that through working on teams that we can wrap supports around students that address their underlying needs? So that's why we developed CharacterStrong Tier 3. We call it CST3, and we call it a solution. It is not just an intervention. It's not just about having data. It is really bringing the resources and tools and professional development all into one easy to access place. So there are certain personalized support pathways that get activated based on need that can be really matched and tailored to the unique needs of the student. We're going to walk you through what those look like. We need to be able to track and monitor who's receiving what and how well is the work going as we try to continuously improve. So there's a student dashboard piece where a school at once can see who's receiving supports, the types of supports, and how well are those supports actually receiving. Lori's mentioned this, I think, 3 times that I've been counting, the need for teams to have data at their fingertips, really actionable, usable data that enables them to make decisions easily. It shouldn't be burdensome. It shouldn't take a long time to gather, but there's some critical decision points that need to be informed by data. How do we select the right intervention? How do we monitor the student's progress in response to that support? How do we gather data quickly on whether the student's receiving the support as intended with fidelity? Those become really important data tools that need to be accessible, and we've built those in to the CharacterStrong Tier 3 solution. This last piece is super critical, and it's ongoing, what we call never-ending professional development. As long as school partners invest in this solution, We have ongoing professional learning and development that's accessible, whether it's asynchronous training modules, whether it's actually live virtual training monthly and quarterly on topics, or what we call full training. And then we have coaching and supervision, monthly coaching and supervision. It's case consultation. People bring cases and then talk about the struggles they have and problem solve how to deliver supports and troubleshoot situations that they're emerging. So we talk about solutions as bringing multiple pieces of the puzzle together into one easy to access place. And that's what CharacterStrong Tier 3 is. So here's an example. We have like getting started in CharacterStrong Tier 3, that based on the role people play, there's a way to get started and become acquainted and build their knowledge on how to use the tool and the platform in order to bring to life a Tier 3 system of support. Some of those, the getting started, all the way go to receiving certifications in certain parts of being able to deliver supports. This is an example of kind of a getting started menu that everybody can tap into on what is this CharacterStrong Tier 3 process? What are those personalized support pathways? How do we get certified? And how do we actually create what we call whole school readiness, where each and every educator has shared clarity on what Tier 3 is and how the school's going to go about supporting students who need this level of care in the building. I mentioned the ongoing professional development. There's calendars that are set on topics as well as resources that can be accessible. But these are pre-planned professional learning opportunities on topics that help educators develop competence and confidence to deliver Tier 3 over time. And in the system itself, this is on an ongoing basis updated with professional learning, whether it's training or coaching opportunities. I mentioned that there's certifications that are embedded within it. We have certain individuals in our schools who can deliver skill supports for students with underlying mental health needs: counselors, school psychs, school social workers, behavior specialists. Sometimes it's other licensed mental health providers that are co-located in our schools. They can go through a process to learn how to deliver the skill supports. This getting started, we call it the explore part of CST3, allows people to become acquainted, develop background knowledge in order to use the platform and prepare to deliver care. What I want to go over now is kind of what we call the CST3 process. This is really a problem-solving process. There's research showing that a problem-solving model is an evidence-based approach unto itself. Basically, if you get a team of people together and you support them to define the need, analyze why the need exists, select a support, develop a plan around that, monitor and evaluate whether that plan worked, that cyclical process has been shown to produce beneficial outcomes for students, regardless of the quality of the interventions that are used within it. Because eventually the adults, due to their problem solving, land on something that's going to be effective and work for the young person. Now, when we introduce evidence-based interventions within this, now we're really cooking. We have a team-based process. It gives us common language, helps coordinate our behavior so we're all in sync with one another. And the supports that we implement within that process are quality. Our job is just to make sure we're selecting the most effective one, designing a plan around it, implement it with fidelity, and then making sure we have data at our fingertips so when it comes to make a decision, we can make that decision in a rapid way. So we want to spend the rest of the time kind of walking you through this process. But before I do that, I'm just curious, Lori, which step of this process do you think is really, really critical to get right? And if you can in the chat, which one of these steps do you think is super critical for Tier 3 supports to be effective?
Can I choose them all?
Yes.
I mean, Really, every step it is very important. I think, obviously step one, if we haven't clearly defined what the young person needs and then select it or match them to the appropriate support, then it doesn't matter if we're doing all the other steps, right? So I think getting step one right stands out to me as the most critical, but they're all very important.
Yeah, that's typically the idea is like if we don't select the right intervention, even if we implement it with fidelity, it's probably not going to work. So we want to make sure we try to select the right intervention, but then when mission's not accomplished, because now we got to make sure we follow through and the student actually receives that intervention, because students can't benefit from practices or supports they don't receive. So I want to walk you through a little bit of what these steps look like. That step one is really about define, analyze, and select. In our platform, there is what we call a this or that analysis. Based on the data and information put in, it recommends one of two personalized supports. These are grounded in the best available evidence. One support is called the environmental support pathway. This is based on functional assessment, taking functional assessment data on the reasons why a student's engaging in certain behaviors and using that information to develop a multi-pronged behavior support plan. That behavior support plan has teaching practices, proactive strategies, and responsive strategies that really provide better and more effective environmental supports that address the student's needs. It's really altering the environment to meet the student's needs. The other is what we call the skill support pathway. This is more for students who have underlying mental health needs. And we have 4 kind of areas of mental health needs where we have the resources and supports to deliver skill support for those students, whether it's anxiety, depression, executive functioning, or trauma. But we've used strength-based language when we refer to those needs. Instead of saying anxiety, we use courageous and confident, because that's ultimately what we're trying to promote. From an asset-based approach, that's what we're trying to help the student achieve so they can overcome situations where anxiety shows up. And the way we go about that is give students skills to feel more courage and confidence to do things that are hard. So we'll walk you through each one of these skill supports. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lori here, who's going to kind of walk us through the environmental support piece, which there's a ton of evidence that's supporting this paradigm and this strategy as an essential tier 3 support.
Right. And when we talk really about environmental supports, for those of you who are already kind of living in that behavioral land, we're talking about doing a quality functional behavior assessment. Can we get to the why behind the behavior, develop that hypothesis? And then can we put in a really effective behavior intervention plan? And I want to go back up into the chat. There was a question by Jennifer that was saying, we talk about not outsourcing to supports, but everyone in our building's maxed. And I don't doubt that that's true. As a special education teacher, I might spend 3 to 5 hours on an FBA and corresponding behavior intervention plan every time I was putting that together for my students. And I want to show you as we walk through this, how you can go through and do that in a fraction of that time, especially for our students where we really know what the function behind that behavior is, and it's a more simple FBA process. So we want to think about, Jennifer, as like, how do we create more space, right? So how do we do things more efficiently and effectively using some of these systems and practices? So we'll start here and look at, first, just like anytime we're doing that functional behavior assessment. So if you're not familiar with that term, FBA is the way we're going to do the acronym for it. Is we're doing all of the data gathering that we may need, and you'll see that on our next one. And then we're going all the way through to developing that behavior support plan. So when we think about functional behavior assessment, really, I think people make this out to be something bigger often than it is. It really is about, can we gather all of the information that we need considering all of the environmental factors that may be impacting this youth. What we're currently seeing is what we call unskillful behaviors from that student, and to develop a personalized behavior support plan. So it's really about getting that information so we can put a good plan in place. So this starts to give you a little look at our CST3 system. And one of the first questions it asks is, do you need to complete a comprehensive FBA? Because we know those are more cumbersome. Or can we take a simple approach? If I've been working with a student and it's very obvious, and I've asked the student about their needs and they are driven by adult attention, I've already gotten my hypothesis. I don't need to spend hours doing observations and interviews. We're going to go straight to that simple approach. So then you can see we've got embedded tools. So should you need to do some of the additional interview process, I always suggest starting with the student. I've seen this as a misstep in a lot of schools that I go out and coach, is no one's actually bothered to just ask the student why they're engaging in the behavior. So that's always, to me, step one. I want to know from families, are they seeing the same types of behavior in the home as we're seeing in the school? And then interviewing those educators. But again, this is if those are needed pieces, they're embedded in the system. And then we're coming up with that hypothesis. Why do we think the current behavior is existing? Is it, adult attention? Is it escape from sensory? Do they want to get out of doing some type of academic task? So my goal with that FBA is to come and develop that why behind that behavior, and then I can start to put in these pieces along that hypothesis. So you can see then again, just it's going through really quick. Most of it, is check boxes. We try to make it as fast as possible, space for additional information if needed, but really just trying to get down to, can I develop that hypothesis, and can I say with as much certainty as I can that I think I've gotten to the right hypothesis. And the majority of the time, we're pretty spot on. If we put an intervention in place and we're not seeing a lot of growth, then we know that maybe we need to go back to the hypothesis. And then what it does is help us to go down what we call a pathway chart. So some of you have seen a similar competing behavior pathway. That's a common tool that's used when we're developing out behavior intervention plans. And what we know is we've got our middle pathway, and that's reality as it is. So we're saying right now the student is leaving the class every day during math time. And we go through and we develop then out the lower pathway and the upper pathway. So what are some of the replacement behaviors we can do now on that lower pathway? And where do we want to be? What's gold star? So then we go through each of the pathways on this pathway chart. So you can see we start to plug in that information around the current behavior, some of those antecedents, what's happening right before I see the behavior, what's happening right after the behavior, and what are some of my setting events that may be going on. What we want to come to is what we lovingly call the FERB. What's our functionally equivalent replacement behavior? So what would be acceptable for the student to do instead as we work towards and skill build towards that kind of gold star? And so for a student maybe right now who's doing very disruptive behaviors to try to get out of the classroom, if I can work with them to use some type of pass system when they're getting stressed, they can show me their pass. They can go out to a designated place, maybe take a 3 to 5 minute break, and then come back in. Yes, my gold star is I want them to just stay in the classroom and not need to leave and miss any of that instruction. But would I rather see them use this replacement behavior now instead of doing something disruptive? So it's finding out what that is as we grow towards that gold star. So then we put all of this in together, and the system, the Tier 3 support system, helps us to develop a clear behavior support plan that we can then pass on to the educators in our building. That's going to be around, what are our teaching strategies? What are the things we need to teach the student and the skills we need to start building? What are some of those proactive, or what we might call prevention-based strategies? Are there things that we could tweak in the environment that will help to support the student? And then what are those responsive strategies? And when you look at this, it really boils down to two things. It's, what do I, as an educator, what are my moves? Like, what do I change within my teaching practice? And then what do I change within the environment? It's adult environment changes. And you can see here laid out in that support plan, then we get what are the steps we're going to do around each of those three main tasks. And then it's about reinforcement, right? And that reinforcement, we know it has to match the function of that behavior. So if I try to build in a reinforcement for a kid who's motivated by adult attention, and what I want to do is hand them, caught being good tickets that they can turn in for a pencil at the student store, it's probably not going to be very successful because I'm not meeting the need that the behavior is meeting for that kid. I need to make sure that reinforcement drives forward what that kid is trying to get. And then I'll hand it over to Clay to talk a little bit about skill supports.
So what we've tried to do too with the environmental support is, typically, if you look at the literature, you need someone with a high level of expertise in like applied behavior analysis. And so what we want to do is make that knowledge base more accessible to more people, so more people can benefit from this methodology. So what we've tried to design is a system where a lot of the expertise is built into the platform that allows people to then come together on a team and follow things step by step. And what the end product is a behavior support plan that's driven by an evidence-based methodology, where we're trying to get at the why for the behavior. We're taking that information and then we're acting upon it to generate really personalized strategies to the student and the environments in which those behaviors are happening. And that's the approach on the environmental support pathway. On the skill support pathway, it's a recognition that a function-based behavior support plan isn't always the most effective support for certain students. What about students who are struggling with depression? How do we increase the workforce so we can actually support a student who is struggling due to that need? Or what about a student who's really struggling with anxiety? How can we interface and make this accessible to more of the educational workforce who can take up the torch to do this? And it focuses largely on teaching young people skills. So we take a common elements of evidence-based practices approach. That means essentially there's been 60, 70 years of research on effective supports for young people who are struggling with mental health difficulties. There's common elements of effective programs and practices. They all have the same stuff. Whatever the name of that program is, what makes it effective, one program to the next, it's the same stuff in those things. That's what is called a common element. And so we know a lot, like young people struggling with anxiety, there are common elements of effective practice to help young people overcome anxiety. And so what we've done is try to package that and make sure educators have access to resources. We bring in families as partners to make sure that they're equipped with how to support their young person. So we have kind of multi-tiered, if you could think about curricula. At CharacterStrong, we have tier 1 curricula at the elementary, secondary level. We have tier 2 small group skill building curricula at the tier 2 level that is really for kind of students with more mild to moderate levels of need, and they can benefit from acquiring skills to better cope and regulate emotions, or benefit from learning social skills to improve relationships, or develop self-management skills to improve executive functioning. We've designed 2 additional curricula at different grade bands, K2, 3, 5, and then we have middle school 6, 8, and high school 9, 12. And those are designed to provide those skill supports that are tailored to students' unique needs. Now, that strength-based language I was talking about, being very careful on how we communicate with students and families about mental health needs. The student, this is about a support to improve the student's success in school and life. And one of the ways we can do that is being able to support the student to acquire skills to boost their courage and confidence. And in particular, to boost their courage and confidence to be able to engage more fully in experiences where things like worry, fear, and anxiety show up that otherwise result in avoidance behaviors. We call it purposeful and proud, and that's for students who are feeling more depressed and irritable. Those are the kind of two sides of that kind of depression coin. It shows up sometimes as depression and withdrawal or irritability. And then we have regulated and resilient. This is for students who are struggling due to trauma or outside adversity in life, to be able to acquire skills, tap into supportive relationships, to be able to engage more fully in experiences. And then we call it focused and successful. This is designed specifically for students with underlying kind of executive functioning needs. And we take their approach. It's about supporting young people to acquire tools that they use to support their unique brains. And those tools help them better self-manage and follow through with daily responsibilities they're expected to do on their own, like keep organized, stay focused to complete a task and finish it. Manage impulses, so you can do the thing you need to be doing instead of something that you shouldn't be doing that could be disruptive or interfere with others. And so I'm going to walk you through how we come up with this. Every one of these areas of need, there's the common elements. So if you look at these are the common elements of effective practice for young people who are struggling with anxiety. They need to have access to a therapeutic relationship. That's an adult who works with them that they trust. But within that, that's not enough. We have to help the kid develop knowledge. That's kind of what the psychoeducation piece is. Understand how anxiety shows up in we call it the 3 B's: brains, bodies, and behavior. Then we got to teach skills. How do we manage that? There's different cognitive, emotion, and behavior regulation skills. Gradual exposure to situations that cause anxiety by being able to confront those things, but to have more courage and confidence. Gradual exposure is the main active ingredient. And then we have to have generalization practices. How do we help young people apply what they learn outside of that session and get in reps, applying it to build fluency with applying the knowledge and skills? The evidence is really clear. These are the types of outcomes that start to happen. Students acquire knowledge, they acquire skills, they have greater self-awareness of situations that cause it to come up and where they need to get better, and they're more likely to apply what they're learning, and that leads to beneficial outcomes. And these are predictors of really good things: relationships, more academic engagement, engaging in more experiences versus less. So give you a little bit of flavor how we go from kind of the skill supports to then saying, okay, we got to develop a scope and sequence. We have to bring this all together into content that educators can deliver. And that's what I want to walk you through and show what this looks like in our actual sessions. In our platform, we have what's called the Top Needs tool. And this helps educators make decisions to figure out what is the student's top mental health need and what skill support would they most benefit from. And this is the personalization. We're personalizing the skill support to the unique mental health needs of the student. And in our platform, we have a way for educators to make those decisions rapidly, to identify what is the skill support that we're going to implement. Within it, take a little bit of a moment. Once we've selected the skill support, we got to figure out some logistics. Who's going to deliver it? Who can support the student outside of those sessions? Who's going to gather data? When will we reconvene as a team to review how it's going? Some critical pieces for the plan before we just rush into implementing. Let's take stock and get some of the logistics. Let's assign responsibilities, and let's clarify some really important dates that then we can calendar to make sure we're actually following through with certain core features. And then we have the actual content. And that's what I want to show you kind of a little bit what this looks like is there's a landing page with all the session content. And so each session, it provides educators with the ability to deliver it. And here's an example of one of the sessions. This is from Courageous and Confident. It's a lesson on skills. So this is in the scope and sequence. The student's going to start learning skills. This is for middle school students. We have Connect. There's 5 parts to every session. There's a start section that really sets the session up for success. We're going to review where we're at in the process of like achieving this place of feeling more courage and confidence. But right now we're learning skills. After that, we're going to be practicing those skills through some gradual exposure. And then we're going to be developing goals and a plan. There's some agreements on how can we get the most out of this time together. The little motivation system we call mountaintop achievements. If the student follows through with the achievements, how can they celebrate? They're going to review what they did the previous session. And then there's this temperature check to make sure the student's in a brain state where they're ready to learn. Now, this is the main meat of the session. What we have is scripted language that corresponds, and this is what the student uses, is a student-facing workbook. And the scripts correspond to what the student is going to be interfacing with. We're trying to lower the burden. So if an educator feels like this is a little bit intimidating, they're not confident, well, we have language script that you can internalize and use to be able to deliver common elements of evidence-based practice to help young people acquire skills. And this workbook is what the student uses to be able to engage. There's some activities, there's things where they could take notes and jot down. For example, they're going to be learning about the anxiety cycle and how we can get stuck in that. But the whole goal is how do we pop out of an anxiety cycle to a courage and confidence cycle? And we're going to have to use some skills. And they're going to learn skills like how to have helpful self-talk by reframing unhelpful thoughts to turn them into more helpful thoughts that cause us to feel and function better. But we got to get good at noticing those unhelpful thoughts, make a decision whether we need to reframe it to be more helpful. And that's the skill the student uses in that process. Gives you a little bit of an idea. Then we have the exit. The exit is just reviewing the learning objectives with the student, looking at this week's to-dos to set up those generalization practices and seeing if the student's ready to go to the next setting. The extend is pretty something that we've thought intentionally about. How do we help educators outside of the session support the student? And so we have prepackaged communications that are designed to be sent to educators to give them, not disclose confidential information, but say, hey, this is the skill the student's learning. Here's the session homework that they have, and here's how you can support them to follow through with it. And we have family-facing content as well that's translated in both English and Spanish with just a simple click here. So we've tried to think about how do we incorporate families. We have video modules that help families learn alongside the school so they can support their young person to be able to do this work. Now, the other piece we want to talk about is the progress monitoring that comes in the system as well, because we have this process. We got to define, analyze the needs, select the support, with the support's environmental support or a skill support pathway. Now we're implementing the support. Once we have that plan, we got to gather data. What we've tried to do is automatically generate in the system progress monitoring tools to be able to track the student's response. Now, Lori, in your work, why is it so critical to not leave out this step when we're building kind of a tier 3 support system?
Yeah, I mean, as we already kind of talked about before, if I see that, looking at this chart, like my student wasn't showing growth and success, it would likely tell me that I maybe have put the student into the wrong type of intervention and support or the wrong type of reinforcer. So then I'd want to start to look at what I need to adjust to try to get more success. What the idea is, we never want to leave a student floundering in an intervention. We want to keep an eye on what's happening across that intervention for the student and make rapid changes as we need to.
How about this data piece too? What we've tried to think about too is the fidelity monitoring too. We're not only monitoring the student's progress, we're monitoring the fidelity of the intervention. Why do we need fidelity data too?
Right. Well, so let's say I did put the kid in the correct intervention, but it wasn't being delivered as it was intended. So then we're not getting the results because the student's actually not getting the intervention we intended for them to get. So we want to be tracking our outcomes, but we also want to be looking at the fidelity.
The last step in CST3 is what we call review and decide. In our platform, the team, before they even start implementing, is setting a date to reconvene and review data. And so what we have is where the progress monitoring data and the fidelity data come up and the team reviews it and they're answering a couple of questions and the system recommends a decision. And then the team discusses, is that the decision we want to make regarding the next action step? Did the student receive the intervention as planned? And so we're going to look at our fidelity data. Did the student respond to the intervention? We're going to look at the progress monitoring data. And we're going to answer those questions, and the system will recommend, based on those answers, what is the potential next step decision to make as a student. So we come full circle. The last part here I want Lori to speak to is like coming back to this idea of ongoing, never-ending professional development. Why is that so critical when we think about building capacity to deliver tier 3 supports?
Yeah, and I've worked across a lot of different schools and school systems, and I've seen, obviously we have people that are stepping in that have high levels of training into this, but we can actually take staff that maybe don't have that level of training. I've worked with paraprofessional staff who can step in and with the right training and coaching supports, they too can be delivering skill groups. They can be supporting a student in their intervention. And that's another way to expand out the number of students that we can serve. So we bake all of this professional development in ongoing, those little reminders or bringing forward maybe cases that schools are struggling with to get coaching from us. All of that is built into the system.
That idea of competent and confident adults are one of the best
So
predictors of
critical.
young people outcomes. And if we can, that internal locus of control piece, if we can provide the supports, give people the tools, but give them the professional development support they can tap into to become really competent and confident over time, those are some of the best predictors and outcomes for young people. And so that's why it is part of the CST3 platform. It's not separate. It comes with the system of care. So I just want to bring us back, like part of, tier 3 from start to finish is making sure we have a comprehensive approach. That's not fragmented. It's not piecemealed. It's not a one size fits all. It's not about crisis reactive management. It's about getting on front-ended, proactive service delivery, making sure all the pieces of the puzzle are brought into one easy to access place. So I want to just, as we wrap up here, talk about some upcoming events, and then we'll protect some time if people have any questions about tier 3 in general, CST3 specifically. These are some of the things we have coming up later this month. Really encourage you. We have an MTSS certification training. People who are in positions to really lead and champion MTSS work. We would welcome you to join us in Seattle. It's usually people from all across the country coming together, like-minded, taking on similar work. Come join us. We also have our CharacterStrong Tier 2 certification training. We have one, the next one's in Anaheim, California. If you want to come to Disneyland, come join us on the front end or back end of that. This is really about that tier 2 level of care. How do we get up and running early intervention as close to the time when students' needs emerge? And how do we really work towards getting that level of care correct? Welcome you to check that out and join us there. And then we have our national conference. This is really our flagship conference where educators from all over come together for a 2-day experience. We have keynote presentations, breakouts, on the most relevant topics that educators are wanting to engage in. And it is really an experiential learning opportunity. So we'd welcome you to check us out. We are going to hang out now. We're wrapped up for this webinar. We appreciate you showing up. If you have any questions, we'll just hang out here for a little bit. And any question's a good question, whether it's about Tier 3, something else, or CST3 specifically. Thank you all.
And feel free, you can drop questions in the chat, or you can just unmute if you'd like to ask something.
Going once.
Tia says I can't unmute, so you'd have to throw in the chat. Do you ever receive pushback from education staff? Yes, all the time. But you know what? I find a lot of times that pushback or that resistance is lack of knowledge. So starting to build some staff knowledge around, function of behavior and why they're maybe seeing the behaviors they're seeing, and knowledge around MTSS and how we really can change that trajectory. I find that helps a lot with that pushback.
Yeah, that's a great starting place. First of all, is it a knowledge gap that's producing a behavior gap? And if it is, that's where professional development comes in. People to really understand. Sometimes people are just feeling overwhelmed, and it's about validating them and painting a path forward. Yep, it's 1999, and what that comes with is the full kind of solution. We have our platform that helps guide, every aspect of it, the professional development, access, the 30 hours of live professional development that educators can tap into, the 2 personalized support pathways.
Yes, that's an annual fee. I see Melissa's follow up on that. And then there's a question, Clay, how have new to behavior support role teachers felt like with supports like this?
Well, this is, we're packaging what the work we do. Like if I'm going out and consulting and with a system, people respond well when you support them and give them the tools to be effective in their roles. And so that's why, it's like when you equip people with really effective evidence-based practices and they get better at using them over time, they're going to taste success. And that success is, the most effective way to create reinforcement for the adults, because their effort and energy cause students to get better. And so that's what we've tried to do with CharacterStrong Tier 3 is bring all that consultation work into a platform that is more accessible for educators to use, because the consultation model of, hey, someone consults with us and then leaves, and that information and those resources evaporate, that's what we're trying to solve for here, where we've packaged it into the platform itself.
And then there's another question about, are the resources adequate for pre-K students?
We have designed this currently for K2. The grade bands are K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12. Now, that being said, functional behavioral assessment does not discriminate and is not relegated to a particular age. It's not like, nope, young kids, it's only for this. And it's like that methodology, the environmental support methodology. Now, our skill support resources are really designed for kind of elementary, those grade blocks, and we have not designed them for preschool age, and that's something that we want to tackle in the future.
Yeah, we're actually currently working on breaking out our Tier 2 solution to be more adequate for pre-KK. And so that one we are working on right now and developing across the summer.
Yeah, Dana, the system supports developing a behavior support plan. You can download that and connect it to the student information system. if that makes sense. So it has all, it tracks the information. So as a team, we're sitting there, we're defining the unskillful behavior, we're identifying the activating event. That all is going to output in other areas where we need that, so we don't have to repurpose that. The end product, though, is a behavior support plan that's in the system, but can be downloaded and uploaded into other kind of data warehouses, student information systems.
Yeah.
Well, the tier 2 and tier 3 will not be added automatically. Those are kind of additional products that I would encourage you to connect. If you already have tier 1, connect. I believe we've dropped a link on how you can connect one to one of our people to talk through what would that look like, what, you know, in terms of the investment and adding that into your multi-tiered options.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just again, oh, here we go.
Yes. Yeah, the question is, we have tier 1, but not 2. Can we just add a la carte style? Yeah, all of our solutions are independent, so you don't have to have one or the other. So if you needed just tier 1 and tier 3, that you can do.
Yeah, I mean, Melissa asked a question here. Is there a specific presentation for departments? You know, this is part of the readiness we do. We offer some type of systems readiness to help people understand tier 3, the need for it and why we need to move on this front, what it could look like to build kind of shared understanding. And then that allows for meaningful conversations on the back end of that to happen. But those are typically like outside of our webinars. We've done a lot of free webinars. On tier 3, we would encourage you to go check those out. Those can be used as a resource for that purpose. And if there is some like an in-person, we have pretty standardized trainings, though. We call it a readiness, system readiness. And that is designed to get everybody in kind of the same boat, understanding kind of what's needed to be able to bring to life a tier 3 system of support. And then is CST3 the type of tool and platform that helps? Well, that's for stakeholders to determine. We think it can really help guide that effort forward because of everything we're bringing into one place, but it's not necessary. Really, it's more about creating the system readiness and then people coming together. It's like, how are we going to accomplish this? Because we're going to need resources. We're going to need professional development. And how do we actually pull it off? And what we think we've designed is something that really enables educators to pull that off once they've created the readiness. But feel free to reach out and have a call if there's something there that piques your interest. We're over time. I want to say thank you again for showing up for the webinar. Be well, take care, and have a great end to the school year and a wonderful summer, because you've deserve every last bit of it.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Everyone.